Thank you.
All right. Hey, everybody. Chrissy, alcoholic, here with the Design for Living with Bill S. and Chrissy F. We're going to talk about Chapter 7, Working with Others, in the Big Book Text of Alcoholics Anonymous. So it says, practical experience shows that nothing will so much ensure immunity from drinking as intensive work with other alcoholics. The intensive work with other alcoholics, works when other activities fail. This is our 12th suggestion. In other words, our 12th step. Carry this message to other alcoholics. You can help when no one else can. And the you they're talking to is the one who's already been through the 12 steps, who's had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps. Step 12 is found on page 59 of the Big Book, and it reads, page 60 of the Big Book, and it reads, having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps. And since we're now on step 12, that means that we've already been through steps 1 through 11, which gets us to the point where we have a spiritual awakening. So now it's telling us what's next. And because we are in a position to be able to help where no one else can, it says you can secure their confidence when others fail, meaning another sick and suffering alcoholic. We can secure their confidence when others fail. Remember, they are very ill. And that's a description of the alcoholic. We are very ill. It's really important to remember that. So here's some promises. When we start practicing carrying the message to other alcoholics and we start helping others, life will take on new meaning. To watch people recover, to see them help others, to watch loneliness vanish, to see a fellowship grow up about you, to have a host of friends. This is an experience you must not miss. We know you will not want to miss it. Frequent contact with newcomers and with each other is the bright spot of our lives. That's like something, that's a whole different life probably than the one you've been living. I know for me, life felt pretty meaningless for a long time, and I felt very useless for a really long time. So to be able to experience knowing that I have been created for a purpose, and my purpose to help other people and help them avert misery and death for somebody else, because I already have been armed with this program and the ability to introduce them to the very thing that saved me. It's a miracle. And it's like, that's what makes my heart happy. So do you want to add anything, Bill, before I keep reading? Come on in.
Of course. It's interesting. It just dawned on me. It says this is their 12th suggestion. And you say it's 12th suggestion, 12th step. I get that. This is the third time they've talked about suggesting 10, 11, and 12, the operative steps that reach out into the unknown. I can't tell you what happened because it hasn't happened yet. Each 12-step call may be different. Each experience in step 11 may be different. You may get more revelation knowledge in step 10 of what's been blocking you from God that you didn't see in step 4. But it's real interesting. And they're also telling us, because if we recall, this book was sent out when there was no AA, there was no compendium, there was no Zoom, all this good stuff. They were sending this book out. And if you recall, when we left the copy, we've been an alcoholic who had a spiritual experience. If we made the call on someone, if they didn't get the book in the mail, but someone inquired and we went there, we left them this book to read. They're supposed to read this volume, which would have included 164 pages. They're telling them what they're going to have to do in the future. And then it segues back into from your to our, which you just read. It's just so interesting the way it just keeps interconnecting with each other, but it kind of brings me in. And if I get this in the mail and I read it and I'm saying, well, wait a minute, if that happens, then I've got to go ahead and do all this. I'm a pretty self-centered alcoholic at that time, and I might be just coming off of the drunk and not know what they're talking about. But you tell me that this is the highlight of my life. This is an experience I don't want to miss. I'm going to be with people who are just like me. It's interesting when you realize how do the people that come together day after day after day, does God use the quality that we had to go drunk every day in our favor to bring us together? You know, most people don't throw themselves into something the way we do, but we walk out of that life into this life, and all of a sudden it's like that life never existed. It's just crazy. I go to meetings to see people that I've seen for decades. Wow, they're still coming and they're coming all the time. Some of them are coming 2 and 3 times a day. It's like I'm thinking, what's wrong with these people? Then it dawns on me that I'm at the same place that they are. What's wrong with me? There's something happening here at these meetings, never to be underestimated. The book's wonderful. It's a wonder. It tells me what to do. But if all I do is read the book, it talks about it in chapter 3, reading inspirational books, that's all it is a book to inspire. Once I apply the action, then it's a book to change. I'm done.
And it also, like you just said, it tells us what to do and it warns us about what not to do. And it tells us the benefits, like the promises or the hope, what it's going to look like when we do the instructions, when we start to take responsibility for our part. And I typically will highlight in yellow the things that I need to, that are my responsibility. So the next paragraph on page 89, page 89, perhaps you are not acquainted with any drinkers who want to recover. Do you want to recover? I mean, I have to want to recover. I mean, that's my responsibility. Okay. You could easily find some by asking a few doctors, ministers, priests, or hospitals. And by the way, these days, with all the meetings that we have access to, just step into any local Zoom meeting or in-person meeting, and there's going to be lots of people. And you find the ones that want to recover. So they, meaning the doctors, ministers, priests, or hospitals, will be only too glad to assist you. Don't, here's your warnings, don't start out as an evangelist or a reformer. Unfortunately, a lot of prejudice exists. You will be handicapped if you arouse it. So it's telling us, don't arouse prejudice. That's our responsibility as we come in, as we become more open-minded. We become willing, honest, and open-minded. They tell us several times throughout the book what we've already read. We beg of you to lay aside prejudice, even against organized religion and all these other things. So, all right, ministers and doctors are competent and you can learn much from them if you wish. So there's my responsibility. I have to have an open mind and see what I can learn from these others. But it happens that because of your own drinking experience, you can be uniquely useful to other alcoholics. So do you know that? Do you really know that you, armed with the facts about your disease, can be helpful and the key to saving other people from misery and death? We're going to read that a little bit later in this book, but you are uniquely qualified. So here's some spiritual principles to strive for, right? Cooperate, never criticize, try to be helpful. So we cooperate, we try to be helpful. Being helpful is our only, I just lost my place, is our only aim, sorry. So my aim is to be helpful. Page 90, when you discover a prospect, and they're talking about a potential person you're going to take through the steps, we call them sponsees, prospect. When you discover a prospect for Alcoholics Anonymous, find out all you can about him. That's what I need to do. If he does not want to stop drinking, so you got to find out, do you want to stop drinking? Do you want to recover? Don't waste time trying to persuade him. You may spoil a later opportunity. This advice is given for his family also. They should be patient. Here's another spiritual principle to strive for, right? Be patient. Realizing they are dealing with a sick person. You want to chime in, Bill? Let's see.
Just to say, like I mentioned it before, and since he's passed, and even if he wasn't, I'd use his name here, Dick Poutney, one of the members of the Newberg group, my home group, who got sober very early in Alcoholics Anonymous infancy. He would say from the podium, if we are not careful, we will give our birthright in Alcoholics Anonymous away. He said, God gave us AA, and God will never take it away, but we'll hand it over to the professionals. Unfortunately, with HIPAA laws and new standards and new insurance policies and hospital rules and regulations, very hard to go back into what you would call a commercial hospital and detoxers. We used to be able to go into Rosary Hall 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. In fact, only the members of Alcoholics Anonymous were allowed to go in. The sheriff couldn't even come in. If he had a warrant, he had to wait until the drunk got sober. St. John's Hospital, we go 24 hours a day. Now you can't get in. Everything is so secure and confidential. And this is the one area where we as lay people, even though we're alcoholics and we're uniquely qualified, we're not doctors. We're the ones, though, that can carry the message of depth and weight, can go into these places, and we're disallowed because of certain laws. And they can't really make an exception, I guess, because then other people could violate it like everything else. But isn't that interesting? And if they get into the wrong place, it's beyond a detox, and they start teaching them a modality that's contradictory. Not only do we have to go in and salvage a drunk, we got to unlearn all that bad information that they gave them out of a book, because out of a book doesn't seem to work for the alcoholic, but one-on-one experience, strength, and hope tends to get their attention. Thanks, Chris.
Yep. And just a reminder, step 12 says, having had a spiritual awakening, as the result of these steps, we try to carry this message to other alcoholics. So that's what we're doing. We're carrying this message of the 12 steps to the next sick and suffering alcoholic, who we have to remember is very ill. And it's telling us in what we're reading now and working with others, do they want to stop? Are they wanting to recover? And if so, we're ready, armed, and prepared to give it our all to help. So we're back to page 90. It says, if there is any indication that he wants to stop, have a good talk with the person most interested in him, usually his wife. Get an idea of his behavior, his problem, his background, the seriousness of his condition, and his religious leanings. You need this information to put yourself in his place, to see how you would like him to approach you if the tables were turned. We're meeting people where they're at. It's good to know who you're talking to. You can't just go in and start saying Jesus is your savior to somebody who's an atheist. But if somebody is of a Christian background, you might talk about that. Or, you get to know who you're talking about, what their relationship to that power that we call God, what is their relationship to that from the start, and so that you can know where to meet them in this process. Sometimes it is wise to wait till he goes on a binge. The family may object to this, but unless he is in a dangerous physical condition, it's better to risk it. Don't deal with him while he is very drunk. Yeah, we can't get information into somebody who is still intoxicated. They need to have been separated from their drug or alcohol before we can make a useful approach to them. It says, don't approach when he's very drunk unless he is ugly and the family needs your help. Wait for the end of the spree, or at least for a lucid interval. Then let his family or a friend ask him if he wants to quit. These are the two important questions. Do you want to quit, and for good? And if he would go to any extreme to do so. So are you prepared to quit drinking? Are you willing to go to any length to do so? And it says, if he says yes, then his attention should be drawn to you as a person who has recovered. You should be described to him as one of a fellowship who, as part of their own recovery, try to help others, and who will be glad to talk to him if he cares to see you. You want to throw in any comments, Bill?
It's interesting way the whole thing came together. Remember, the fellowship at this time is about 4 years old when this book is released. There's not that many sober alcoholics in the world. They boast of a number, but most of them are within, a year to two sober at the most. So they're giving us experience that they've had. But remember, if you've got 100 sober alcoholics on the globe, and I don't know what the population was back 90 years ago, someone could look it up on Google and figure it out. But it wasn't a lot. It was a very, very minute percentage. So they're sharing their 12-step call experience when they're calling on a drunk, mixed with their experience of all of a sudden they get a hold of an alcoholic that wants to change, and now he's coming along with us on the broad highway. But I like that it says have a talk with someone closest to him, because I remember earlier in the book it says once in a while the alcoholic may tell the truth. Most of the time he's going to lie to you, so you really want to find out what you're dealing with. And I like what some of our members say. And now with the integration of a lot of other stuff that people are mixing with their alcohol, a lot of them are coming in without any spouse left. Some of them have never gotten married. Most of us need beyond rehabilitation. We need habilitation. We haven't learned how to live. We got caught up in the grip and never lived life. One might say we were living only to drink or to destroy ourselves chemically. And now all of a sudden we're in AA. They're coming in these big plethora of halfway houses, or what you call recovery centers, to take them off the street and try and nurse them back to life, because no one wants anything to do with them. And they're getting hit quick because of the other stuff that they're mixing it with. But occasionally we still get a drunk who comes through the door that still has a wife and kids that got sick alongside of them. And they can give you some information as to what his behavior is. Is he bleeding in the middle of the night? Is he wetting himself? What's he doing with the kids? Because now when he gives a rebuff that he's not that bad, you let him know that he knocked his kid's teeth out. And you're aware of that without causing it for him to have retribution towards his family. You're armed with facts about him that he either A, might not be comfortable giving you because he's ashamed, as we all know that, or number two, he might have been in a blackout and not even remember. So you're dealing with someone who's at least participating in the alcoholic demise. And I think that's important here, to get as much information to see how you'd like to be handled. So.
Thank you. Okay, bottom of page 90. If he does not want to see you, never force yourself upon him. So it's giving us the warnings. We want to go force and charge in and try to make it happen, and crusade and really just force. And they're telling us, don't force yourself on him. Neither should the family hysterically plead with him to do anything, nor should they tell him much about you. They say in is it the doctor's opinion, frothy appeal? It's like, there's nothing that's going to come from frothy appeal, pleading and begging, please, you need to stop. That's they need a message of depth and weight, not a frothy appeal. And if they are not willing, we can't force them into it. Okay, so they should wait for the family, right, should wait for the end of his next drinking bout. You might place this book where he can see it. So they're telling you some suggestions. Put a book out there in the interval. Here, no specific rule can be given. The family must decide these things, but we can urge them not to be over anxious, for that might spoil matters. Usually the family should not try to tell your story. When possible, avoid meeting a man through his family. Approach through a doctor or an institution. Notice the word approach, right? We approach. Sometimes you'll hear in a meeting where people will say, well, I'm just sitting back, you got to come to me. And that's not how it is. I've heard that before. And it's no, you see somebody who's sick, they're really ill, they need someone to come make an approach. They're already sick in self and shy or embarrassed or humiliated. They're not actually at a point where they could humbly ask for help. So it's really important for us to take the lead and walk toward them and make an approach and offer help. Okay, they may or may not want it, but that we make that approach. Okay, approach through a doctor or an institution is a better bet. If your man needs hospitalization, he should have it, but not forcibly unless he is violent. Let the doctor, if he will, tell him he has something in the way of a solution. Okay, so that's like the good news. The good news is we have something in the way of a solution. So sometimes, if you're lucky, you have psychologists or doctors who say, I'm going to hook you up with somebody from AA who's got a solution. If they're humble enough as a doctor, like Dr. Silkworth, to say, or Dr. Young, who says, I can't help you, but there's something that can. So we do have a solution. That's the highlight of that promise right there. When your man is better, the doctor might suggest a visit from you. There, you have talked with the family. Leave them, though you have talked with the family, leave them out of the first discussion. Under these conditions, your prospect will see he is under no pressure. He will feel he can deal with you without being nagged by his family. Call upon him while he is still jittery. Some more instructions. I go call upon him, especially when he's still jittery, right? That's the best time because they're a little bit more open and receptive to, I need help. I'm willing to do something to feel better. He may be more receptive when depressed. The more depressed, the more likely he's going to get help. When I was in the detox, and they said, are you willing to quit drinking? And I was like, why? Would that help? Like, I was so clueless. And they said, yes, it will. And I thought, well, if it's going to help, I'll do it. That was my mentality at that point, because I was really sick and really suffering. So I was willing to do what they were suggesting. So we're in a pretty suggestive state when we're really depressed. And if somebody comes to you and says, there's a solution that's going to help you, that's a good opportunity. Do you want to chime in, Bill?
Before we get too far away from the preceding page, last paragraph on there. So we got to paint a picture, because you can see most of the people, if you got sober on this computer, got sober in Zoom, or walked to do an AA meeting, the magnitude of alcoholism 90 years ago is there was no light at the end of any tunnel. What you were actually was in an abyss. And you have people who couldn't leave, who stayed together, were going down the drain with the family. And all of a sudden you show up, you're going to be like a messiah to these people, because they're going to know that you used to drink like father did, and you're not like that anymore. And they just want something to give them a little bit of hope to hang on to. And you come into the light, and what they're saying is, urge the family not to be over anxious and not to hysterically plead, and to say, well, look, at least Bill could do this. Because then what happens is, alcoholics have that antisocial mentality where I don't like to be told what to do. If I was going to clean my room and you thought it was a good idea, I would refuse to do it, even though I wanted to do it, because I don't like someone giving me an idea. I only like my own thinking. So what they're saying is, listen, let's not antagonize. This guy may have been willing to see. Christy brought up another good point about the approach. It says, if you want what we have, and we put it incumbent upon the newcomer to figure out what the hell it is we have. Not everyone represents what we have. And it tells us in chapter 2 what we have. We've had deep and effective spiritual experiences. We have a way out on which we all agree. We're free today by God's grace. We have a fellowship. We have a lot of things going on here. And you can't expect a new guy who's still hazy or drunk to figure out what it is. If you want, he must not want it. Are you kidding me? He's walking. He doesn't know the difference between being a horseback or a foot. And it's our job. It's our birthright. It's our gift to go and call on the new guy, because the very least what the book tells us is he may have helped us a lot more than we ever helped him. I'm reminded of the condition that I can't recall. I don't know what it's like to be drunk if I'm not drunk no more. I mean, I get the memory, but what I mean is I see the behavior. So no pressure, right? Go ahead. You don't have to work with me. Most of them choose to get someone else because they find out that I'm one of those megaphone guys.
All right, we're on the middle of page 91. See your man alone if possible. At first, engage in general conversation. After a while, turn the talk to some phase of drinking. Tell him enough about your drinking habits, symptoms, and experiences to encourage him to speak of himself. If he wishes to talk, let him do so. Alcoholics are going to tell on themselves. All you have to do is tell one story about one of your crazy debacles, and they just start like letting it out, and they're going to like they'll tell on themselves like so quickly, and you'll get a good idea themselves describing the truth about their drinking. So that's why we have to be willing to pull out, the skeletons out of our closet, because it's going to be of good use to help somebody else. So we're willing to talk about our experiences. Okay. You will thus get a better idea of how you ought to proceed. If he is not communicative, give him a sketch of your drinking career up to the time you quit, but say nothing for the moment of how that was accomplished. If he is in a serious mood, dwell on the troubles liquor has caused you, being careful not to moralize or lecture. So it's telling us not to do this, right? This is another like warning, don't moralize or lecture people. This is a life thing, not just a talk to alcoholic thing. So just remember, it's telling us how not to communicate with people. If his mood is light, tell him humorous stories of your escapades. Get him to tell some of his. This is helping him to start to see his step one. We're starting to let him see where alcohol has taken him, in a place that's safe to talk about it. Because as you know, you're not going to go tell your crazy escapades to your grandmother or some other person that loves you deeply. You won't even tell it to your therapist. You go to your therapist and tell them a bunch of stuff other than your drinking problems. And so we are trustworthy. We set the tone and a rapport with people so they can actually feel comfortable and safe to talk about what alcohol is really doing in their lives. All right, bottom of page 91. When he sees you know all about the drinking game, commence to describe yourself as an alcoholic. Here we go. Now we're going to introduce the idea of what an alcoholic is. Tell him how baffled you were, how you finally learned that you were sick. Like, we got to admit, I was sick. Give him an account of the struggles you made to stop. Show him the mental twist which leads to the first drink. Yeah, we've been trying to stop for a long time, and how difficult that was, and how, for us, the only way that we ended up being successful was to come into AA and to have this program and to follow all of these steps and to get that power that we needed to live, right? So we're starting to introduce to them. We're just starting to introduce to them. We were sick, but it says, show him the mental twist which leads to the first drink of a spree. We suggest you do this, as we have done it in the chapter on alcoholism. If he is alcoholic, he will understand you at once. He will match your mental inconsistencies with some of his own. That's what I was trying to say. We kind of get them to like almost tell on themselves. They start to see the sickness. Go ahead, Bill.
I wish that we did this more often, because how many times do we sit in a meeting and we hear people that we know full well or suspect anyhow, not even alcoholic, and no one qualified them. Right, the question, if he is alcoholic, he will understand you right away. He might not be, he might be a problem drinker. He might be a guy who went on a long drunk and the family calls A&A because they don't know what to do. Or he may be a guy that was committed because he overdrank. I remember my dad was a compulsive gambler. There was one Christmas that he went out and celebrated. He got on a drunk and got so drunk he was just talking goofy. And they took him down to where we're at, which used to be Cleveland Psychiatric Institute, a mental hospital. And as soon as he sobered up, he got out and he never drank again. He wasn't one of us. But could you imagine calling on him being in that state and agreeing, and all of a sudden he comes to A&A and finds out it's a better place to hang out than at home with his neurotic wife, which is why he was drinking anyhow. And all of a sudden we have a non-alcoholic amongst us, and the danger doesn't begin there. It begins when a real alcoholic walks through the door and the non-alcoholic wants to be a good AA member. So he starts to sponsor him by telling him what he ought to do and what he ought not to do, rather than sharing his experience, strength, and hope, which he doesn't have. I think that's critical. I think I'm going to put that in the book.
Excellent. And the mental inconsistencies that they just mentioned, the last line of the first paragraph on 92. He will match your mental inconsistencies with some of his own. It's like what it says in the doctor's opinion. Men and women drink essentially because they like the effect produced by alcohol. The sensation so elusive that while they admit it's injurious, they cannot, after a time, differentiate the true from the false. It's the mental inconsistencies. We are incapable of seeing clearly, it's injurious, but we can't stop. We know we should, but we don't. We're aware that it's causing harm, but we keep going. Mental inconsistencies. I know the right thing would be this, but I can't do that, All right. It says on 92, if you are satisfied that he is a real alcoholic, and they describe the real alcoholic on page 21, just a quick recap. Page 21 says, but what about the real alcoholic? He may start off a moderate drinker. He may or may not become a continuous hard drinker, but at some stage of his drinking career, he, the real alcoholic, begins to lose all control of his liquor consumption once he starts to drink. And another great description of the real alcoholic I love is on the first paragraph of We Agnostics on page 44. It says, if when you honestly want to, you find you cannot quit entirely, or if when drinking, you have little control over the amount you take, you are probably an alcoholic. So if you, back to page 92, are satisfied that he is a real alcoholic, begin to dwell on the hopeless feature of the malady. Show him from your own experience how the queer mental conditions surrounding that first drink, that's the mental state that precedes, right? The insanity, the mental state that precedes a relapse. I forget what page that's on, but it's the mental state. That prevents normal functioning of the willpower. And the good news is you will return to normal functioning of your willpower. So you can look forward to that in the future. But don't.
It tells you that in chapter 3, where it says, obviously, this is the crux of the problem. The main problem of the alcoholic centers in the mind rather than the body, and that's what they're alluding to. And before you read much further, since we're doing our regular deal here, I like what it says. If I'm satisfied he's a real alcoholic, he doesn't have to be. I know what I'm dealing with. And I like how people say, well, I can't call, I'm not going to call my dad an alcoholic, although he killed 3 people in a DUI and drank himself to death in prison. That works for me. We are qualified to know what we're dealing with. Just because someone doesn't say they're an alcoholic doesn't mean they're not. Any more than just because someone calls themselves an alcoholic doesn't mean they are. You got to meet certain criteria. But if you meet them, because it's going to tell us in chapter 3, or it has, by every form of self-deception and experimentation, I will do everything in my power, including drink myself to death, to not have to admit that I'm alcoholic, because that might mean that you're going to take my Baba away, and I can't imagine life without my Baba. Go ahead, Chris.
Yep. Okay. Don't at this stage refer to this book unless he has seen it and wishes to discuss it. And be careful, another warning, not to brand him as an alcoholic. We've learned they have to come to this themselves. Like Bill just said, you might know what you're dealing with, but we're not telling them what they are. We're just capable of being helpful to them because we know what an alcoholic is and we have a solution. So that's the good news. So it says, be careful not to brand him as an alcoholic. The instruction says, let him draw his own conclusion. And where is it so you can help them to do that? In the book somewhere it says, tell them to go to the bar, try and drink, have a drink, and stop at just one. Do it a few times. You'll get a good knowledge of yourself. Try to quit for a year and see how that goes. They'll start to realize quickly on their own, but it has to be them conceding to their innermost selves. Doesn't matter if we know, they have to admit it. So let him draw his own conclusion. If he sticks to the idea that he can control his drinking, and there's the problem, right? Many of us, we stick to an idea that we can control our drinking. Tell him that he possibly can, and if he's not too alcoholic. But insist that if he is severely afflicted, there may be little chance he can recover by himself. Continue more instructions to speak of alcoholism as an illness, a fatal malady. Talk about the conditions of body and mind which accompany it. Keep his attention focused mainly on your personal experience. Explain that many are doomed who never realize their predicament. Candidate,
Chrissy, question.
yep.
So on the page before this, 2 pages before this, if he does not want to see you, never force yourself. Leave this book somewhere where he can see it in the interval. So you probably leave it on his table. You accidentally forget it or let his wife know. If he picks it up and reads it, he may become interested. Then on this page it says, and maybe we're guilty of doing things because what we want to do is get everyone take them through the book like that's going to solve their problem. It says, guess what? Don't at this stage refer to this book unless he has seen it and wishes to discuss it. Because I'm the living testimony. I'm the alcoholic with experience galore. He's the alcoholic with lack of experience, but a lack of sharing his experience with someone who has it. So why, and they don't think it's inconsistent. So if he doesn't want to see me, the living big book, then I leave the written big book where he can see it. If I'm there, why would I refer to the book and have him start reading it when I'm there in front of him? I'm only going to be there for X amount of time. The book can stay. And it's even going to tell us, leave him the book, let him read it. And if he decides to, on my second approach, on my second visit, if he wants to go through with the process, let him know that you're available to make a decision, step 3, and hear his life story, step 5. And what we do is we place this ridiculous stuff like I'm supposed to guide this guy through this whole process and tell him how it works. And I promise you this much from experience. When I was surrendered, I didn't need a sponsor to do anything. The instructions, except to hear my 5th step, obviously, and maybe give some direction and amends. But something happened where the instruction, my 4th step kind of threw up out of me just following the instructions. The 5th step was an eager process to share this with someone and get it out of me. 6 and 7 was certainly there. I wanted God to change me. The amends, I don't know, but I probably don't need a lot of encouragement once I start to taste the honey of being connected to this power. Because in step 5, it says, if I follow instructions, I will thank God from the bottom of my heart that I know him better. Something's happening. I'm sensing his presence flow into me. And if you're telling me that in order for me to get more of that or to keep it, all I've got to do is go rectify my past. It's not going to take much encouragement or someone reading the book to me to make that happen. I'm going to be anxious to go out there and rectify it.
Yeah. Well, that's saying that you have already realized your predicament. It's like summarizing in a beautiful way. So if they explain that many are doomed who never realize their predicament, but the good news is if you do realize your predicament, you're no longer doomed because we've got a solution for you. You know, you have to admit you're in jail before you can get out of jail. It's kind of like if you don't realize that there's a problem, you're not going to look for a solution. And so that's us kind of helping them by talking about our own experiences with alcoholism. And it's, you know, as the illness and a fatal malady, we start to talk about what it is and how we experienced it. They start to say, oh, me too, me too, me too, me too. And then they start to realize, whoa, I had more of a problem than I thought I did. But remember, we can't differentiate the true from the false. We fool ourselves. We lie to ourselves. We tell ourselves all sorts of stories. We justify and delude ourselves. So there's a problem here. We haven't been able to get honest yet. We don't know the truth. So I'm going to keep reading. Doctors are rightly loath.
No, I was going to say something. It's almost 10 till.
Okay.
And if we finish it, here's what's happens. If you go to the rest of this, I would rather start next. I would rather have our celebration next week and see how that goes. But if you read this paragraph, you're going to get into the God thing, and then we're going to leave it open where they're talking about the conception. I don't want to open that can of worms today and not address it. Is that fair?
Yep. How about we read one more sentence? I just think that it's
You can read one more sentence, but I just want to make note that we're going to start to continue to speak of alcoholism when they come back. When
great.
we come back. Okay, yeah, read your sentence and say what you're going to say, please.
Yeah. Well, it says, doctors are rightly loath to tell alcoholic patients the whole story unless it will serve some good purpose. But you may talk to him about the hopelessness of alcoholism because you offer a solution. And that's the thing. Alcoholics Anonymous offers a solution. Doctors have been trying to help these people for years and they can't seem to do it. we are beyond the human aid, which is a segue into what Bill just said we're going to talk about next time. But the most important thing is because we offer a solution. You will have your friend admitting he has many, if not all, of the traits of an alcoholic. If your doctor is willing to tell him that he is an alcoholic, so much the better. Even though your protege may not have entirely admitted his condition, he has become very curious to know how you got well. Maybe we'll stop right there. Go ahead, Bill.